You are about to watch our live event, Should Britain Divorce America, with Aaron Bastani, Helen Thompson and Mary Harrington, here live at the UnHerd Club. And if you want to watch the whole thing and not just the first 15-minute preview, then you have to be a subscriber. Go to unherd.com/live and you'll get uninterrupted content all the way through to the very end and the audience Q&A. Plus you'll get everything else UnHerd has to offer, and it's a pretty great deal. Go to unherd.com/live.
Welcome to the UnHerd Club. If you haven't been here before, this is a little space in the heart of Westminster where we talk about bigger things than are normally discussed in Westminster. That's sort of the idea. Although we are in Westminster, we are not of Westminster. This place came out of the idea, it was born in the awful COVID years when we were all just stuck at home staring at our screens and doom scrolling and becoming more and more hateful, with the idea that you could actually accomplish more in person, and it was kind of worth getting together as human beings once in a while. And that's what we do pretty much every week. So if you are already a member or a subscriber to UnHerd, fantastic. If you're not, please join. If you're watching online, I should say this will be live streamed for the first 15 minutes, and then we will be subscriber only after that. But for the total of £3, less than a Starbucks, you can sample life inside the UnHerd universe, and it's definitely worth it. So we like to set ourselves big, difficult questions in this place, and this evening is no different. Is it time for Britain to divorce America? Now, to answer this fully in 1 hour is going to be a challenge, but if there are 3 people who can help us do that, I think we have successfully assembled them. Let me just introduce them. To my right is Mary Harrington. Regulars here will recognise her. She is one of our star columnists, one of the OG UnHerd columnists, and it's wonderful to have her here. Helen Thompson in the middle. Professor Helen Thompson is Professor of Political Economy at Cambridge, and most recently was star of These Times, which was a fantastic UnHerd podcast that is, the archive is still available. You should definitely go and check it out. She recently published a fascinating book called Disorder. And at the end is Aaron Bastani of Novara Media, but now also of UnHerd. As you will read on his Twitter bio, he is, as of recently, also a columnist here at UnHerd. And the reason we brought these particular group together is that the question of Britain's relationship with America really has 2 kind of strands to it, we think. There is, first of all, the kind of realpolitik. There is economics, security. Is it even worth discussing whether we can escape from some kind of close coupledom with America? And I will be turning in particular to Professor Helen Thompson for that. She is one of the world experts on energy, geopolitics, and exactly these questions. So I feel like Helen's role this evening is to puncture the bubble whenever the rest of us get kind of carried away and start having flights of fancy about living outside America's shadow. In fact, you know what? Why don't I just start with that? That's going to be my question to you in a minute. The other strand, I think, is the cultural and political relationship. And it just feels that, to me at least, this will be my provocation to our group tonight, that the kind of populist energy that really emerged after 2016 began life as quite an isolationist movement. There were a lot of people who wanted to withdraw from globalization and its effects. And now, in the latest incarnations of Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, seems to be really Atlanticist. The more America, the better. I'm not sure if Nigel Farage is a Republican member yet, but he probably will be soon. Those are the 2 strands. So hopefully, by the end of this hour, we'll have a sense of which way we should go. Before I invite Helen to just lay some founding facts for us, I want to take a poll. It's a very vague and open-ended question, and many of you, I can see, will be thinking, what does that question even mean? How am I supposed to answer that? I think it's still reasonable to take a poll. Like, intuitively, I'm going to ask, do you feel we should divorce America? Which really means, are we too close? Are we too enmeshed? And would you like us to find ways to separate? Or do you think that's the future and we should get even closer? So please raise your hand if yes, you think it is time for Britain to divorce, quote unquote, America. Okay, so I'm sensing kind of somewhat less than half the room, but let's see what happens when I ask the next question, which is, what if, please raise your hand if you think it is not time for Britain to divorce America. We should not be trying to divorce America. That is definitely a larger number. So the room is somewhat tilted in a Atlanticist direction. Helen, is Britain a vassal state of the United States, and has it always been?
I'm not sure I would use the word vassal, but Britain is acutely dependent upon the United States, I think, in a number of ways. Economically, in terms of energy, if you just look last year, we took more hydrocarbons, that's oil and gas, from the United States than anywhere else in the world. That wouldn't have been true 15 years ago. It would have been nowhere near true 15 years ago because the United States then wasn't actually exporting oil and gas. So if you just look at it as energy dependency, we are more dependent than we were, and we're that dependent at a time when we're becoming generally more dependent upon imported energy than in some sense we've ever been before. If you go back to the beginning, I would say that the relationship takes its shape, albeit not in a continuous story since then from the First World War. Because essentially when Britain enters the First World War, it tries to fight a continental land war when it's not really equipped to do that. It could win a war in an economic sense against Germany, it could win a naval war, but it has to send the expedition force to the continent. And in order to maintain that war, we have to borrow lots of money from the United States. We have to import lots of oil from the United States. We have to, in the end, import food. We need the help of the United States in order to keep transit possible across the Atlantic for the oil and the food to arrive. We need the US then to join the war against German submarine warfare. And you can see by 1918 that actually this is quite constraining in the United Kingdom's, and I'm stressing deliberately here the United Kingdom's domestic politics, because when Lloyd George makes probably the fatal mistake of saying we're going to conscript Irish men into the army, precipitating a crisis in Ireland, he's got the American administration constantly on his back about how he can deal with that crisis. And I think there is no doubt that the way in which the British government deals with Ireland between 1918 and the formation of the Irish Free State at the beginning of the 1920s is constrained by what the Americans think. And obviously at that point, Woodrow Wilson's Democratic president, Irish, well, the first part of it he is in 1918, Irish voters are pretty important. I don't think it's then a continuous story through the interwar years and into the Second World War, but the Second World War replays everything in spades. And this time, when the Americans say, actually, we will finance you, they say the condition of that is that you will dismantle your trade empire, you will dismantle your currency bloc. Now, we don't actually dismantle the currency bloc, but we do dismantle the trade empire. And then the US exercises quite a lot of influence about how we can exercise geopolitical power in the post-war world. And so in some sense, we never really escaped those dynamics, I think.
So it's literally more than 100 years old, at least,
yes,
this dependency. If you take us up to the current moment, there is a lot of talk about de-dollarization, about a new multipolar world order, about, I don't know whether that's just online that people talk about that, but there is this sense that America's power is waning. Do you think that's true, and does that affect our relationship?
I definitely think it's true that many more states, not just like Russia and China, would like a world in which the dollar was less important. I think that's probably true of us, and it's true of the European Union, certainly. But it's one thing to want the dollar to be less important, and it's another thing for the dollar to be less important. The Chinese have been trying to make the dollar less important and the renminbi an international currency in some sense since 2009. And they're actually better years of doing that were in the immediate years after 2009 than what's gone on since in many ways. If you say to us, and this goes to, I think, something that's crucially important in understanding why we are so dependent upon the United States, is if there were another financial crisis, like there was in 2008, like there was in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, we would be entirely reliant on the Federal Reserve providing dollar swaps to us, not least because our banks continue to be significantly exposed in dollar markets. And as we know, we don't have the best relationship with the bond markets in this country. And if you think about the way in which the people economically advising Trump have thought that they can use the leverage of the dollar in the present geopolitical moment, the backstop of that, the thing that it actually depends upon in the end, is a threat that when the financial crisis comes, the Fed will not provide dollar swaps. And we're not a country that could do without that. We've already demonstrated that like several times over. Now, I don't think that means that we're a vassal of the United States in the sense that we don't have any autonomy in any area. But I think that there are clear limits as to what we can do in a context in which we are dependent for the United States, crucially on energy imports and in the final instance on dollar swaps.
And the third pillar of that, I guess, is security. And I want to come back to that. But let me just bring in Mary. So Mary and I first met in, I think, 2019. And we had a wonderful, strange summit of fellow thinkers in Windsor Castle, as I recall. And the mood there was really all about throwing off the kind of harder edges of globalization. A lot of the talk among that group, I remember, was about trying to kind of reassert some national spirit. Fast forward 7 odd years, no, 6 years. That's why I'm not doing the economics. And I noticed that you, in common with a lot of people who were at that summit, are much more involved in the American discourse. And you look at reform and how completely intertwined they are with Trump. How do you explain that shift?
Well, there's several things going on here. You have to remember that when we met in 2019, it was about a month to 6 weeks, if I remember rightly, before the election that brought Boris to power and got Brexit done, and then everything which followed from that. But the context for our conversations there was this deadlock within Parliament over whether or not, or how, or if, or under what circumstances and on what terms we should actually implement the referendum to exit the European Union. So when most, I think, of my public thinking about Britain's identity or place in the world today happened really in the context of trying to grapple with how we thought of ourselves in relation to Europe. And America didn't figure nearly as bigly, to borrow a term, in that picture because, there was something vaguely analogous going on over there. I mean, 2016 was the twin earthquake, wasn't it? Within very. But I don't remember Trump really being very pungently on my radar at that time because we were all very bound up with thinking about Britain's relationship to the European Union, and that was so all-encompassing. And the second thing which is going on there, which is really where America comes in and where America's influence and contribution was actually already present, even if I was perhaps not as conscious of it at the time, was that the medium within which we were having these convoluted arguments about Britain's relationship to the European Union and about national identity and about whether or not we can go off and be hobbits in the countryside or whatever, I don't know. The medium within which that was happening was a set of technological communications platforms, all of which were created in America and owned by Americans, and most of whose data centers are in America. Twitter, notably, but not only Twitter. The social media revolution, which was such a critical component in the eruption of populism over the teens and into the 20s. And I think really the inflection point where we tipped over into that being the dominant mode in which we collectively engage in the West with the world was the COVID-19 crisis, at which point everybody just became ridiculously online. And that was a few months after our Windsor summit. And at that point, because everyone's just locked sitting in a cupboard of one sort or another with nothing to look at or nobody to engage with except through these screens, at that point, the entire political discourse became functionally the same. The whole Anglophone political discourse became essentially the same place. And I mean, that was I mean, there are very practical reasons why I ended up turning up in the American press a lot. I mean, I needed to work because otherwise we'd have had to sell the house. And there were American publications were right there. I mean, all I had to do was send an email or message someone on Twitter.
Do you now, it just feels we've reached this very intense moment where there's Elon Musk who has some sort of obsession with the UK. Nigel Farage is on and off a plane to go to various meetings with him. Do you regret, or are you worried about the fusion of those? So just
movements? To round off that thought, what I've seen emerging and what I think's really interesting to try and sort of sift through is the sense in which that functionally homogenized and deterritorialized Anglophone political discourse that we now have, which is effectively, we've been absorbed into the American political discourse, is really sharply sometimes at odds with these very concrete material realities and sometimes quite acute tensions that still persist. Our legal environment is very different to the American one. Sometimes you get these surreal moments on the internet where somebody just assumes you're American because you're speaking English and makes a comment about your healthcare system which just completely doesn't apply, or just, people make assumptions which don't apply because of concrete geographical, political, economic, legal differences and ways that things work very differently. And so the internet has this flattening effect down, and then there are these locally, geographically specific realities bubbling up from underneath. And how you pick these things apart and how you navigate politics in that context is, I think, a very new set of questions.
But do you feel
we're trying to understand.
Do you feel worried about it? Do you feel there's too much America in our political discourse?
If you can explain to me how we make that otherwise without unplugging the internet, I'm all ears.
That's a great question for Aaron Bastani, in fact. Aaron, is there too much America in our political discourse, and what possible methods do we have to push it back out the door?
Well, I think the word divorce is quite challenging because, of course, people hear divorce and think that's a bit dramatic, isn't it? Can't you see a marriage counsellor? Can't you try and maybe, have a bit of give and take in the relationship? But we must remember, a divorce is between equals. We are not equal with the United States. For anyone who's watched Game of Thrones, we are Reek. Okay, we are the gimp in the chest, wearing the gimp suit and on some chains. I would just quickly respond to what Helen was saying. I agree that we are dependent on the US. I think it's a little bit more recent. If you look at even something like nuclear weapons, the atom bomb, technologically the UK is ahead of the United States until about 1940. Certainly before the Second World War starts. The US then, of course, has the Manhattan Project. Even then, in 1945, Ernest Bevin develops the atom bomb, a British bomb, not just as an anti-Soviet weapon, which it is, but also as a matter of British prestige, that we can make this, and as he says, put a Union flag on it. So Britain is still able to do something really significant, become the world's third nuclear power, after the Second World War.
We could still do stuff.
We can still do really big stuff. By the way, that was delivered by the Ministry of Supply, not Serco or Sodexo or Capita, for about half the cost of the Manhattan Project. There you go. The state can do good things at pretty good value. I would say that we were broadly equals until the Second World War in many ways, and that it's been a very gradual level of dependence. I think vassalage in some ways. I would say that we're politically sub-imperial. We're a sub-imperial power. We do the bidding of the United States with vassal state characteristics, which is to say that technologically, I think we are a vassal state. UnHerd, I don't mean to be mean to UnHerd, because it also applies to Novara Media, doesn't exist without US technology. Without Stripe, you do not have a payment system, I presume. Your servers, without Cloudflare, as we found out today, lots of the internet doesn't actually work. The guy who can fix Cloudflare was probably, picking his kids up from nursery, and nobody got 8% of the world's websites for an hour, right? Visa, Apple Pay, the App Store, Amazon, so much of this infrastructure that we are dependent on in this country, I think really, you can only really call it a status of vassalage. And I would make that great declaration that we heard from the Americans in the 1770s. No taxation without representation. We are paying an America tax. We are paying a tax as a vassal state of America. Every day, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars are crossing the Atlantic, primarily to big tech, but other firms too. Blackstone's one. Keir Starmer loves them for some reason. And we aren't represented. So I think you've got two options. You become the 51st state. I'm willing to go lib out with Mamdani and AOC in New York. Let's do it. Because, by the way, you're going to have a lot more Democrat presidents than you presently do. You might even change the debate with regards to public health care in the United States. So that's one option. I mean, I don't want that option, but it's a sensible option. Or you go the other way, which is to say, well, we won't pay that America tax anymore. Or certainly we'd like to reduce it, which I think we can. I don't think people realise how much inflation is being created in the British economy by US big tech. Amazon, when you do an Amazon search now, as you probably know, I'm sure you do, we all use Amazon, even the people that claim to not use it. $50 billion plus last year was made by Amazon by selling search rankings to merchants. 50 billion plus. It was 38 billion the year before. 50 billion plus. To basically rig the search results in a way that is actually injurious to the consumer. $50 billion. That is money which is being paid by people in this country and all kinds of countries as merchants. The ad game, right? Back in the day, you know, you had Mad Men in the US, you had the equivalent over here. That was money that stayed in the country. That is all going to Meta. That is all going to Alphabet. Uber, of course, another great example. Our payment systems. I came over here, I got the tube, I use Apple Pay. You know, 0.001% of a penny or whatever went to Apple. Okay, that's not much, but believe me, in the grand scheme of things, it really does add up. So as 68 million people in this country, let's be real, if not more, we are sending significant amounts of money across the Atlantic every single day.
So what is that option? What is the decoupling option?
Well,
don't use
that's precisely the word I would use. Divorce is a bit, you know, maybe we just separate and we don't tell the kids for a few years.
Conscious decoupling.
Yeah, different beds. You know, I'll go in the attic. You're welcome to see each other. Don't let me know about it. That's what I would say would be the short-term move.
But what does that mean practically? So it means when next time you take the tube, you're going to fish out some cash from your...
Well, here's the crazy thing. The dependence on US big tech isn't in the public interest of this country. But the craziest thing of all to me is that a ton of people in this country could make a ton of money building these products here. That's the craziest thing. But we have such this strong muscle memory across our entire media and political class that we have to be subordinate to the United States. Well, actually, maybe we could tax Amazon significantly more on things like Prime. Prime's a very, very good product. Pay them more and direct that towards the British high street.
You're a member of Prime?
Pardon?
Are you a member of
Amazon? Of course I am. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, of course I am. So...
But is this just a tax argument rather than we are going to technologically innovate and replicate
all this stuff
ourselves?
Listen, believe it or not, despite writing a book with the word communism in the title, I'm a moderate. I think you have to tweak the dial. I'm not suggesting this is why divorce is a very strong word, but the end game I think has to be, and I've written this down because I have a terrible short-term memory, right? The end game has to be autonomy and defence, freedom and foreign policy, break with the American internet, innovate in diplomacy. Those are 4 things we should be doing as a country. Britain is a middle power, but it's a great middle power. It should start behaving like it.
So break with the American internet means what? So it means you're going to leave the social networks. Are you going to start your own kind of national social network?
If Russia can build V-contact, why can't the UK? Why can't Europe? Why can't they?
Evidently they can't.
I think they probably can. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the security service in this country use AWS. Can you believe that? We are not a sovereign country, right? The security services, MI5 and MI6, use AWS. So a very simple thing. We should have UK firms with UK servers providing those kinds of services to the literal security services. Is that a crazy, outlandish proposition? So I would say tweak it, move it bit by bit, of course. And we should have favoured status for UK firms doing things which right now are being done by American ones. And like I said, those are endpoints. And maybe you don't get 100%, I don't think you even want to get 100% of the way there with these, but you want to get probably 70% of the way there. On autonomy and defence, nuclear weapons, I say all the time, Trident is not a British deterrent. And people say, well, yeah, we pull the missiles, but you're just being a stupid, you know, Putinist stooge. These are strategic nuclear weapons. They're not tactical nuclear weapons, right? If we use one in a conflict and the Americans don't like it, do you think we're going to have access to the pool afterwards? Really? If Washington thinks we've done something really stupid and at odds with their national interests, do you really think we get to use all the other missiles that we own in our shared pool? Of course we don't. Be honest, be realistic. There's just a complete absence of intellectual courage and honesty with this whole debate. It's bullshit. And we have an entire political class lying to themselves. They believe it. They're not just lying to the public. They're lying to themselves that we have an independent deterrent. We don't. If a deterrent can be pulled after they don't like one use of it, then it's not independent, is it?
But so we can't leave it then?
Well, the French have their own independent deterrent. Why can't we?
Helen, is it time to ring the bell and puncture a bubble? Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the question is, in all the issues that the UK faces at the moment, at the same time, is this and should this be the priority? Which should be, let's just take the technologically decoupling from the United States, factoring in how difficult it is proven for other states, also middle power states, to break technological dependency upon the United States. I mean, I can see the attraction of it, like in principle, but if you say to me, like, what is the most important issue facing this country right now, I would not say it is stopping lots of people in this country using the technological platforms of the United States. I would say we need to do much better with our energy, and in terms of technological innovation, then energy is quite central to that. So if you don't break dependency on energy in the United States, you're still going to have an underlying dependency underneath the technology. And at the same time is we have a general economic crisis. We don't have enough people in working age work in this country. We have a pretty terrible fiscal position, not necessarily because it's objectively fiscal, because it's perceived to be high risk. We have a dysfunctional politics. It seems to me that on the scale of things that face this country, that decoupling from the United States is not the priority. It would be very nice in the long term.
Do you think it's possible?
If you want to continue watching this event with Aaron Bastani, Helen Thompson and Mary Harrington, which I'm sure you will, then what you need to do is go to unherd.com/live, become a subscriber, and you can pick up where you left off, plus you get everything else UnHerd has to offer. That's unherd.com/live. If you're seeing my face now, that means I'm afraid your free preview has come to an end. And if you want to continue watching this event with Helen Thompson, Aaron Bastani and our very own Mary Harrington, then what you need to do is go to unherd.com/live and become a subscriber. Not only can you watch the rest of this event and join in our Q&A at the very end, but you also get everything else UnHerd has to offer. Go to unherd.com/live and join our free thinking family now.